Hey, Dave, welcome. Welcome to my podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Dave.
And
Great to be here, and thanks for the invite. This is wonderful.
yeah, so for my audience with me today is Dave Betts, all the way from South Africa, right? I
Cape
think
Town,
that's where you
absolutely.
reside. All right. And currently, you're the owner of DB Labs. You founded Energy Drive Systems, and I saw on your LinkedIn profile you're also a life coach. So we're gonna learn a little bit about
Yes.
all these facts about Dave.
I
So
have my left brain and I have my right brain.
oh
So
man,
we'll
it's funny you
we'll
said
work
that
it
because
out.
I saw your YouTube video, at least some of those that you guys you and someone else did a thing about the 7 habits, and I've been actually playing, like, I think it's the second habit. I've played that chapter like 2 or 3 times now in the car because I keep thinking I really gotta make my uh what is it, the I want to say constitution, but kind of like your begin with the end in mind thing, right? So I've had that a lot in
Yes.
mind. And he talks in that chapter about the right and left brain. And I haven't heard a lot about the right and left brain. And I know that was a big deal a number of years ago,
Mm,
but I haven't heard many
yeah.
people talk about that. But I
Yeah,
guess
no,
it's true.
Daniel Pink and Mark Manson, I think, are two writers that wrote a lot about, and it's true, and yeah, that for me, I've kind of spent lots of time in my life in my left brain and in my right brain, and sometimes in no brain, and it's like,
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
that
so
seems like the no brain part seems like it's coming more frequently the older I get, right?
that's for sure. Yeah, that's for sure.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, well, hey, I wanted to ask you. So I was really interested to find out, since you and I, this is like the first time we've actually really conversed. So this is kind of exciting for me. Um, so tell me a little bit about the background of the whole energy drives thing, how you got it started, and because I think I read a little bit about it on the website at some point. But
Mhm.
were you a drives guy? I mean, you sold drives, started them up. What did you do?
So yeah, I studied electrical engineering at college in the UK. So my parents told me I needed to go and get a trade. So I went and did electronic engineering, power electronics, and so variable speed drives are very in this primitive stage in those days. That's like '88. Um,
Okay.
and then I worked for Ford Motor Company as a contractor, putting in their new engine plant, and they were bringing in new drives then, and that's kind of was how I got into drives. So yeah, so I've at various times in my life I've been in engineering, um, and then when we decided to come to South Africa in 2009, after a couple other businesses, one of the things my wife said to me at the time was, "You need to go and get a proper job at least for 18 months." So I so I agreed and went to work for a variable speed drive company. so
So who was that? Was it
so
a
it's,
distributor or was it a manufacturer?
yeah, it's a company called Vari Speed, and they were a distributor for Yaskawa drives.
All
Japanese
right.
company called Yaskawa. Really nice drives, by the way. Like them a
I'm
lot.
very familiar with Yaskawa. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
they were
my
rebadged
background too.
Omron. Oh, is it? Okay. Oh, wow. Yeah, they were
Yeah,
rebadged
yeah,
Omron in years ago. So kind of that was yeah. Look at that. Eh?
yeah. I got to get my dad on a podcast because he started a small distributorship back in the '80s, but it really didn't kind of kick off until, I want to say, the '90s. It kind of got moving. But the first product lines, the first major product line, I would say, was the Saftronics drive line, which was really the Yaskawa drive with the Saftronics label on it.
Yeah, it's
And
exactly
so
that.
I
They
always
also
tell
made
people, when I was in
servos.
high school, when I was in high school, my dad had like demo cases on the bench downstairs, and I was poking around in those, trying to see how fast I could make the motors spin. So if you go back far, like, it sounds like you do, everything was what, like CNO2 and something like that.
Yeah,
So
in
yeah, the
code.
CNO2s and the SNO1s, and you remember all those parameters. Everything was like a, you
It was
know,
a digital input and you had a
yeah,
list of
just a seven.
parameters. exactly.
7-segment LED. So is that what Ford used? What did Ford bring into their plant back then? What were they
Well,
buying?
Ford were Rockwell. They were Rockwell
Yeah.
they were using Data Highway. I remember Data Highway was the comm
Yep.
system that they were using between the two, and Allen Bradley PLCs. And Yaskawa were also doing servos at the time, if I remember rightly. Yeah, I mean, I was working mainly on the PLCs integration, and then of course you get involved in the drives because someone knows that you actually know a little bit about it. So we were playing with those drives. And then I went to work in a company called Sony. They make televisions,
Oh
and
yeah.
they had loads of lifts that lift televisions up, and then pick and place units essentially. But the big 29-inch CRT TVs that weighed an absolute ton, if you remember them.
Uh,
And we had to try and make these lifts work, in an 8-second cycle time. So we were like really busting these drives out, get them to work, and then break and
yeah.
then work again. So that was my experience in drives, or my background. And then I got involved in other businesses and some charity work. And then, as I said, 2009, my wife being a South African, we decided that we would come back and bring our kids and do life in South Africa.
Hmm.
And so I went to work for this drive company, and basically said, they asked me to do the business development side of this thing, and I was new to the country, so I said, let's give it a go. So I tried selling drives, which you do, and then I noticed that no one's using drives for energy saving, because in the UK, you were using some drives for energy saving, right? In South Africa, no one was. It was all process controlled, but no one was using it for fans or pumps or that's everything was direct in line or Star Delta, and there's a few soft starters, and that was about it. So I kind of saw this opportunity, right? I'm gonna really do well, and tried to sell these drives and say to the guys, you can make all the savings, but people really didn't believe you. They didn't. They
I'm
no matter
laughing
how
because
convincing.
we've walked in the same shoes. I know.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
know the
Trust
pain.
me, I'm a
Yeah.
drives guy. What can you say?
Yeah.
Um,
And you use your energy savings calculators to show, hey, like
the
here's what
whole
your
thing,
damper
and you draw
positions.
your
Yeah. Yeah.
curves, and you plot your lines, and you,
Uh-huh.
um, yeah, yeah. So I'm sitting, I'm wondering, how can I do this? So I'm sitting, waiting to go and talk to yet another, CTO to convince him. And as I'm sitting there, this photocopier dude comes in, right, and he starts having this conversation with the receptionist, and I'm listening because I was, quite curious. And he said that photocopiers are really expensive, and yeah, very expensive. He said, so how would you like it if I gave you a photocopier and I put it in the corner of your room, and you only paid for every copy you make? Do you reckon your boss would talk to me? And it's like a light went on in my mind. I'm going, hang on a minute. What about if we put the drive in there for free, right? And we put a meter on there, and we went 50-50 on the savings. So half of the savings we'll give them in cash, and the other half we'll take as a fee. I guess that's how the idea started for this company called Energy Drive. Of course, I tried to sell it to the company that I was working for, and they said no, they just move boxes, and they way too risky.
Yeah.
So, but that's like a red rule to a bull for me. So, yeah. So I thought, okay, well, all I need is someone with a big checkbook, and I can convince to back me, and let's give this a go. And I met a mate that I hadn't seen for 18 years prior to that at a meeting we were at, quite by chance, and he's a commercial dude. His name's Mike Ward. He actually he's I think he's the GM for Europe now in Energy Drive. And I sat with him and I said, look, I got this idea. If we do this, this is the savings calculations. We could charge a fee, and it's a win-win. He went away, bashed it all out on his spreadsheet. He phones me 8 o'clock. He said, I've been up all night. We've got to do this. We just got to do this. He's so animated. He was like, come on, we got to do this. Like, okay. I said, oh, well, where are we going to find the cash? Because we're both stone broke. So then where are we going to find the cash to go buy some drives? And then when we're going to find it, he said, that's, so he knew some guys, and long story short, we went and pitched to them, and we said, look, um, just trust us, give us the money, let us do this once, and we'll show you it works. And yeah, it took me about 4 months to finally find a client. Because when you go into a client, you say, oh, by the way, we'd like to put a drive in your factory. It won't cost you any money. It's got a bypass on it. If it goes wrong, you just put it into bypass, so there's no risk. Oh, and by the way, you're going to make, a percentage of the savings. Most people look at you like it's a scam, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah.
I was surprised to find. I mean, honestly, I was surprised to find that that you guys had a track record of success when I learned about Energy Drive. Just because my path is very similar to yours. We tried to get creative on some of those things. We used to try to do a lot, and most of my career, I've been a drives person, focused around selling some sort of drive. And it's amazing how, I mean, I had one, and you'll appreciate this. I had one. I want to say this is 5-6 years ago. It was a medium voltage drive. I think it was like 900 horsepower, and it was in a metals facility. It was a pump that was designed to push water through some sort of boiler system, and there was basically, like, if I remember right, two boilers it was designed to run two of these things, but they had shut one down completely. So they had this thing running across the line and throttled back like 50% all the time. I mean, beautiful case scenario for saving energy, right? Of course, a lot of times our energy costs have been pretty low in the region we're in, so I knew we were up against it. Plus, they were actually co-generating some power and feeding it back, so they kind of deducted that from there. And I mean, it was like we showed a 24-month payback on this thing, and we sat down with the guy, and he scratched on the paper and said, oh, well, by the time we had installation and a couple other things here, he says, we're out to 26 months, so we're not going to do this. And I'm just like, are you for real? So you're going to go, I'm thinking, like, had he done it then, they would have been paid for it twice by now,
Oh,
and it's like,
at least, yes, at least. I mean, we had numbers of companies over the years that we went to, and then ultimately said no to us. The line was, we'll do it ourselves. You go to all the trouble to show them how to do it and all the savings, which they didn't know before, of course. And then you give them the whole, the magic sauce, and they go, we'll do it ourselves. Cheers for the idea. And then, and then you come back a year or so, or in some cases 3 years later, and of course, they've done nothing, right? So then, smug face, got to make sure you haven't got such a big smug face. You start to write what you would have saved on the board, right? And the CFO's eyes go like this, and the poor engineer's wilting in the corner. And needless to say, we usually end up signing the deal.
Yeah, I remember asking that question because I was kind of concerned about that. Was how often do you do all this work up front and then have a customer basically take what you've put out there and do it themselves? And it is interesting. You would think that would be a typical move, but it sounds like it's not. So it sounns like
it's
they
not.
just
I
don't
mean,
get.
I think if people are going to be proactive, they are proactive. And you walk around these sites, and the proactive guys are already doing something around the energies. There's always some bright spark up there, who knows what a variable torque curve looks like, for instance, and understands, how it works. But it's always the sites, we made a focus in Energy Drive. We said we want to find the stressed sites that don't have the money and have low expertise, because that's where you start, right? You start there.
Yeah.
And that's where you can make the biggest difference and the biggest impact. And then eventually we ended up in the mines and in the steel plants and etc. as we go. But you also think that people know and see these opportunities. But it's like a cow. If you drive past a cow every day in a field, you stop seeing the cow, right? So
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
So
Well, if if you worked with drives too, I mean, the ability to just control the speed of the motor, I mean, it's incredible. Like the difference of everything and the longevity of the system, because now you're not just cross the line starting. You don't have all that, you know, wear and tear on the mechanics of, firing that thing up, plus the inrush. There's just so many things. And it amazes me because in the states that I've worked in, Ohio and Pennsylvania particularly, I think they have, both of those states have a fund that everyone pays into that pays an electric bill, and then every so many years that fund reaches a point where then they try to give that money back for those types of projects. And I've worked with a couple of those people that their sole purpose in their job is to go find those things and help people fund them. And even with that, it's hard to get the projects, because that was also in that one I just described. That was also part of the equation, was the funding they could have gotten on top of, the cost of the drive.
But it's
I, you
risk,
know,
isn't it, Dave?
yeah,
People are actually risk adverse. You throw all the science at people, but the default position is better the devil you know than the devil you don't, right? So, and some of these engineers, this section of work, the pump or the high pressure water pumps has been their life for 25 years. That's what they look after. And now this unknown comes in and says he's going to put a drive in and he's going to turn both motors on and bring a lower speed, and we're going to do this. I mean, that is risk. That's big red flags for someone like that. And I realize that the majority of our job is about change management, people change management, than it is about technology. It's about, if you're going to get on the
that's a great
drives, you've got to
reminder.
understand people. Yeah.
That's a great reminder. It's true. It's it's funny because I don't think anyone's ever said it that way to me, and I think that's actually a really solid point. But it is true. You're trying to change people's ways of thinking, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And I mean, how many times have we put a drive on a cooling tower system, right? And you set the temperature at 23 degrees for argument's sake. And the guy has walked past that cooling tower for 15 years and the fan's going up full bore. Okay. And next day he wanders and the fans are just kind of doing this, His first feeling is something's wrong. Okay. And so he
yeah,
goes and turns the stat down to 16, or the drives spin up and we're all happy again. And then I get a phone call at the end of the month saying, your system's crap, it doesn't save any money. And
yeah,
you realize if we had spent as long taking the people through the change management and letting them really understand it as we did putting the gear in, we would have saved ourselves 6 months of heartache the other side of the project. And we would have made champions of the engineers. That's what our job is, to make the champions the engineers.
One of the things that I noticed in working with the team at Energy Drives that's really been I think one of the game changing pieces for me, as a drives guy, usually trying to sell one piece, right? You're saying, okay, if you put this drive in, you can control the flow, open the valve wide open, and then you'll save energy. But what the team at Energy Drive does that's really amazing to me is the full analysis of the entire system, right? Like, it's like top to bottom, like no stone unturned. How can we take this whole system? You got mechanical engineers and people looking at, every damper in the duct and how everything functions. And that goes much beyond like what I did as a drives guy, right? And so when I started to witness that sort of taking place working with the guys, I realized, okay, now I can see how convincing this is, because they become partners to the customer quite quickly without any cost. And suddenly,
Absolutely.
it's funny too, because there'll be the times where someone like gets up on the roof and they're like, I didn't even know we had a damper here, and it's like mostly closed, and you're just like, geez, guys, you know I mean, that's the kind of stones they uncover and turn over, and then it's like, wow, So there's even more oftentimes that, or where sometimes the plant can be throttled, way back because there's a whole shift that isn't working and it's just running full bore or that whole shift, and just stuff like that. That again, it's not even a function of the drive; it's more a function of the process and how they're operating, and everything. So yeah,
And I think the focus Energy Drive quickly understood is that our job is to optimize systems, and we use drives to do that. And the problem is if your focus is drives, then your zone that you look at is just the drive and the motor that's attached to, and you don't realize that actually optimizing the system is actually the end in mind here. And to do that, you have to have a systems view. But it's also
Yeah.
driven from the fact that, because Energy Drive provides all the capital to put it in, so they're providing the risk. The end of the day is we have to do the very best due diligence we can, because
Yeah.
ultimately we have to sell twice. We've got to sell to the client and we have to sell to our CapEx committee to give us the money in the first place to put it into the clients. We've got to sell twice. But that gives a
Oh, yeah.
robust solution, all right? That makes it robust for everyone, which
Yeah.
I think we've got much, much better at over the years.
Yeah. Well, it's been fun to watch. I can say that, and to see what's been put in place. And along with that, I'm going to switch gears a little bit because I know I wanted to talk to you about one of the things that you seem to be able to do with that company is really get good talent hired. And we talked. I think I asked you a little bit about this Gallup Strength Finders, I think is what you called it. That so
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about how that came into play and what you found with that program. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about it too. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to. So, background is I got a little bit bored with engineering and went and did industrial psychology because you do, right? Because I actually really like people, and I like people more than machines, I think. And so, part of doing the industrial psychology course is to understanding the strengths within people that make up good teams and what makes up bad teams. And part of the hiring processes of companies was part of my study. And I realized that hiring of staff was very unscientific and didn't have much data attached to it. Usually, was someone trying to ask a few delicate questions and then make a decision based on a CV, which was difficult to base on anyway. And so I came across Strength Finders years ago, actually, in its early years of inception. So obviously there are personality mapping tools, right, which we all familiar, like Myers-Briggs and Enneagram and stuff, which are really
Mm-hmm.
good and they have a place. Strength Finders is not that. It's not a personality mapping tool. What
Okay.
Strength Finders is, it's an online questionnaire. It's run by a company called Gallup. And you set a 45-minute online questionnaire, and it gives you either your top 5 or your top 32 strengths. And they are divided into 4 sections. So you have strategic strengths, which is thinking strengths. You have influencing strengths, which is your ability to influence other people. You have relational strengths, your ability to build relationships and build team, and then executing strengths. So how you execute, what motivates you to execute, how well you execute. So those are the 4 categories. And then within them, there are 5 strengths that are part of that thing. So you do the online survey and you create a map. And so probably about 4 or 5 years into Energy Drive, when we started to have a lot of recruiting happening, I decided to give this a go, and she took it to get everybody to sit an online Strength Finders test and then map them all out. And it's a fascinating exercise because quickly you can see where your holes are. You can see
Mm-hmm.
where the team is strong and where the team isn't strong. And so then the obvious choice there is, okay, I want an engineer, but I don't want an engineer that's very strong in, for instance, strategic. I want an engineer that's strong in analytical, but also is particularly good in execution, stronger in execution. So you're not looking at a CV through a lens of experience or qualification. You're looking through CV firstly to see if they got the right background, and then you want to see do they have the right mix of strengths. And that became the default way in which we started to hire people around the profile of strengths and how it complemented the ones that they were going to work with. And then, of course, we would then provide support, to bolster up where there are some weaknesses. And so, in my job now as a mentor and business coach, I do a lot of the strength find mapping for organizations, and it's a
So,
tremendously powerful tool.
so yeah, it's interesting, and the reason I was curious about it is because in most it seems like every company does some sort of something like this. And I think when you're an employee, the first time you take a test like this, it feels, I'm trying to think of the right word, but somewhat intrusive, or that it's going to be used against you, right? Like I think that there's a
Right.
lot of, in the past I've seen this. Trying to think of the last one I got involved with, but it was a different company, and some people, and after the fact, I heard some people like found sites where they learned how to like try to rig the test, answer the questions a certain way. Of course, I just went through and did my best, like they told you to, and some of the things that came back with I agreed with, and some I kind of was like, well, I'm not so sure about those strengths or weaknesses. So some of these tests I've questioned how well they do, but I've also heard some good things about. Sometimes we tend to focus on the weaknesses. It seems like we sort of center right down into our weaknesses, right? Like, where do I need to
Mhm.
work on? And
Mhm.
I've heard some research. I know there were some books I was listening to that talked about the value of actually focusing on the strengths side of the equation, and really focusing on the strengths more than the weaknesses, because in your strengths you can build up a lot more momentum, almost, I think, was kind of the thought process. And
Yeah.
that's kind of why I wanted to ask you, because is the program sort of geared that way too, or is that just how you maybe utilized it? Because your employees that I
Yeah.
talked to seem very positive about it, which is unusual. So
Well, there's two things here, right? You first you have to create a culture where people want to have personal growth. That's essential. If you try and use personal growth
mm,
tools without first creating a good seed bed in which to put those seeds, because that's what they are. You're putting seeds of thought and curiosity into someone. So the first thing we wanted in Energy Drive was a thing where everyone wants to have personal growth. Everyone wants to grow, and everyone wants to feel significant. So we had to put a culture in before you just go straight to the test. Because the problem
mm,
is a lot of people think they're trying to catch me out. They come at it
yeah,
without the supporting culture. This the second thing about Strength Finders is exactly how you said. It shows us what we are strong at and where we should be playing. And people that are putting these tests together need to be saying, okay, where is the best place for me to play this person? Not, man, this guy, I wish I hadn't hired him or whatever. But and actually have have the strength and courage to move people around so that I keep saying some people are goldfish trying to climb trees. Neither the goldfish is bad or the tree. They're just not supposed to be together. Um, and so we we need to kind of move. And so that was the first thing we did. But then we're doing something which not a lot of people do, which is use Strength Finders proactively as a hiring tool. Now,
yeah,
Gallup will probably shoot me if they heard me say this. I don't know. But once you know that it works within your tool, why wouldn't you want to use it in a proactive way to also get an idea of this person
yeah,
and see how it will fit with my team, right?
yeah. I want to go back to what you said about creating that sort of seed bed of a growth mentality. That's, I think, pretty key, and I think that's harder to do in a larger organization. I worked in a small company, and I worked in a couple of large ones, and you know, it you the bigger the company, I think the easier it is to start to feel a little bit like just a number in somebody's
Yeah.
visualization dashboard. And you know and your management can, they can sort of play a big role in how that information is utilized as well. So depending on how your manager sits down with you and reviews it with you, can have a big effect as well.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's that's a tricky part. I would say that's the harder part, is really getting that environment where everyone feels comfortable, sort of being vulnerable about their weaknesses and saying, hey, I may not be good at this, and being okay with that, to your point, and
It's isn't it interesting because we is what we said about before you put a drive in a place, take the engineering guys through the change management process, and we're saying the same thing before you go putting the tool of strength finders in place. Pay attention to the culture and change management within people. Remember, everything we do is a people's game. I guess at the heart of Energy Drive, that's what I tried to bring in the DNA. It's people first, people first. And it isn't just a it's people before drives, definitely in
Yeah.
Energy Drive. Otherwise,
Yeah.
the
Everybody
drives don't
says
really
it.
work. Yeah,
Everybody
right.
says it, but it's you can tell. I would say you can kind of tell when that's a reality or not. I mean, you can kind of feel that, right? And that's,
Mm.
I think that goes back to you, right? I think that's, because I wouldn't probably be here interviewing you if I didn't hear some really positive things about the culture you
You're so
created.
gracious.
So yeah, no, I
You're
think
gracious.
it it's true. And everybody, and I, if you've seen some of my comments on LinkedIn, I mean, everybody on the team there at Energy Drive seems to have that, like, I mean, just really good people, and
Mm.
you can just tell they're dedicated to what they do, and it's not about just sales. I mean, obviously that's important. Everyone's got to we're all out here to make a living. I mean,
Yeah,
it's what we do, but
yeah,
it goes deeper for all of them, and it's
yeah.
contagious. And I think that's what I've really enjoyed about working with
That's
the
lovely.
guys there.
So
So
good to
yeah,
hear that. And that I
it's
mean that for now I'm retired from Energy Drive. To hear that, that's the legacy that we want, right? That's the legacy you want to leave. And so
yeah,
you're very gracious, but thank you for sharing that. I think that's it. I think my whole thing all my life has been that whatever it is, whether it's drives or strength finder programs or anything else, it's always people. Everything is people, and if you forget that, then whatever you do, you won't be a success at in some meaningful way. Um,
yeah. I
yeah,
think you and I have a lot of the same, ideas and principles that we go by. I feel the
mm,
same way. I mean, what I have enjoyed in sales mostly my whole life is the relationships with the people. I
yeah,
mean, it's probably what's closely associated with that. And if you were selling drives or working with drives in my career, a lot of times I've been able to solve problems with the product. But ultimately, I like how that makes me feel because I make that person their job better. They're done having problems with that machine. It actually runs right. Their whole life
yeah.
gets better. So those are the things that are very fulfilling, right? But it's still about that person and the interaction, and
Yep,
I
it
mean,
is a sense of
I've had
significance. We that's what we want to feel like we're growing and we're learning, but we have some sense of significance in this world, right? And you know, if it's
yeah,
putting a drive on a motor and we're saving power, and ultimately, let's talk about the big picture here. We got to save this
yeah,
planet, right? And you know, then there's huge significance to be had to be a drives guy right now. What finer time to be a drives guy than
yeah,
right now? You know, um, yeah,
yeah. And it's amazing because I know I used to think, well, most of my customers have already put drives on, motors that are running pumps or fans, which is where the energy savings is. But come to find out, there are quite a few larger motors, particularly like the medium voltage systems out there that are still some kind of soft start or across the line start. And yeah,
majority, I reckon, Dave. Yeah, absolutely.
and I think that's because those are the expensive ones, right? If they're new, like if they're new installations in the last 10 years, I think people look more serious at the VFD at the beginning. But anything that's a little bit older, yeah, and especially, like I always talk about baghouse fans. Those things are like everywhere in industry, and I mean,
Everywhere.
almost every one of them is either a soft start or cross the line starter. And
Yep.
there's a whole that we could channel down a whole road about that, but
We could, and it's just because the risk is so much bigger. The bigger the size, the bigger
yeah,
the motor, the bigger the risk. And we just got to be better. Again, I feel like hopping on now. Going slow to go fast, I guess is my saying, right? It If it takes an extra 6 months to get the deal closed, but you go slow enough to take everyone on the journey with you, um, your likelihood of selling the deal is there, and of course the likelihood of no comebacks is true. I also think that all of these drives that have been sitting on these pumps and fans, if you went back there and you optimized the set point of a couple notches, we could make a huge difference just by doing that.
yeah,
uh,
yeah. One of the things that kind of I've found here, and this goes with the baghouse fan, you'll kind of appreciate this for whatever reason, the Environmental Protection Agency has sort of established this baseline for measurement on baghouse
Mm.
fans that is just measuring amps on the motor. So
Yeah.
they look at that and say, okay, you give us the log of your amp draw on that motor, and we'll, if it goes out of some window, they're going to assume that the bag has the bag that's the filter has torn,
Yep.
and
Yep.
therefore the load has changed or something else has gone wrong. So now, when you try to put some sort of drive on that same application, amps is really irrelevant because you're trying to minimize your amps, right? You're trying to lower
Yes.
the usage, but there's not really a path. So the very, agency that's trying to help the environment doesn't necessarily have a path forward for a customer to say, what if we gave you this measurement, whatever that is, if it's airflow or whatever they want, some differential pressures. I don't even know what they really want, but
Yep.
it's like, hey, we need to change the reporting system just to be able to make this easier for the customers, because even that's like kind of a snag. And it's like, I saw that before. I was ran into this before I knew Energy Drive. I was running into this before, and I was like, everyone's like, well, what are we supposed to give our EPA people? And it's like, well, I guess we got to figure that out, right? So I mean, I'm sure it's going to change and we can get there. It's just like there's just always these roadblocks that
Yeah.
you know make it a little bit
They are.
difficult, to your point, that you have to hold somebody's hand through the process and go slow.
Exactly, yeah, exactly, and go slow. I think that's the thing, and don't throw your hands up because you can't put the bagging fan on. Well, push on with the pump or the cooling tower fans. Do the simple stuff and make the concept work. If
Yeah.
you've got a CTO that just don't believe you, then get a 5.5 kilowatt motor and stick it on a little fan, and then
Yeah.
try that out.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Man.
So
I love it.
I know probably nobody's going to want to listen to all this technical talk that we've just had, but I do want to switch gears with you again and talk about what you're
Mm.
doing today with DB Labs, because I think it's important to hear what you're doing with that, and for the audience to know
Yeah,
what's going on with Dave Betts today. So
yeah. So Dave Betts retired in 2022 from Energy Drive. I think it was 2022. And decided that living in London is very expensive, especially when you have the opportunity to go and live in Cape Town. So we always wanted to live in Cape Town. But I think the journey of Energy Drive, the 11 years I was there, from literally an idea to being a global company now, the pathway, the lessons you learn, those experiences have to be shared. They have to be, to give me meaning for my 11 years, and, and realize that actually the struggle is the same. Doesn't matter if it's drives or whether it's solar panels or whatever it is you're doing. The struggle of growing something and all the way through those changes are common to all. And I really wanted the opportunity to find companies that were like Energy Drive in maybe 20, 30, 40 people strong kind of thing, and help them scale. And essentially, that's what DB Labs does now. I'm working with 11 companies at the moment, and all in various stages. One of the largest companies got 1,500 employees, and the smallest one's got three. Um,
hmm,
but they're all in different stages of growth. And I walk alongside them, some of them as chair in their board, some of them on their exco. And a lot of it is getting to the floor level and working with people, creating a culture of learning, a culture of curiosity, a place where it's okay to laugh at yourself, uh, all the good stuff, right?
yeah.
And because we all need a mentor, we all need somebody that we can. And some of these CEOs are lonely, right? So
Yeah. Well, my dad started a company. I think I mentioned that earlier, and I worked in the family business for a number of years, and we occasionally would get some consultants, some of them good, some of them not so good. I think for my parents running the business, their accountant was actually their best consultant. He was really good with business
Mm.
and very sharp with the numbers, and gave them some really good coaching along the way for basically free, a lot of it. Um, but yeah, I mean, I know for me personally, working in the company though, I didn't get a whole lot of coaching, and I could have used, a lot of that. I had a lot of ideas. We had a lot of different things we were thinking of trying to do to grow and scale. And it was a small distributorship in a relatively small market. And, eventually I ended up leaving the family business. But
Mm.
yeah, I mean, I could totally see where you just get busy doing the day to day. If there's no real vision for change, if there's nothing there, it stagnates, right? And then everybody
Right.
just, they're punching in, punching out every day, and it's,
Right.
it doesn't have as much meaning, and nobody knows where you're going. So,
Exactly. I
you
mean,
know,
you're so busy working in the thing, you're not working on the thing, right? And
that's it.
you never lift your head up. And yeah, it's crazy. You end up going round and round in circles, right? And it's interesting. I'm been invited, and I do a seminar for the UCT University here, their MBA course, which always makes me smile, because I say to them at the beginning of every lecture, you go to university to get the answers, you go to life to get the questions. So
It's true.
uh, it's
Yeah.
true, right? So, I'm going to now give you the questions you really should be asking. um, over and over and over again, I think there's a theme building in our podcast today. Uh, Companies don't fail because of product. Companies fail because of people, and um, our leadership and our ability to firstly own ourselves and own our own leadership, hold ourselves to account, and then to create meaningful culture in our companies where people want to thrive and be part of that thing. If we do
Yeah.
that, we're on a course to success, right?
Yeah. Have you read the book Good to Great with Jim?
You loved it, yeah.
Yeah,
Jim Collins,
Jim
yeah.
Collins. Yeah, I forgot the last name, but Jim. Yeah, that's just such a good book, and talks a lot about having the right people in the right seats, which kind of goes back to your Strength Finders
Strength
idea. And
finders, yeah.
I think it's a real challenge to get the right people in the right seats in any business. And sometimes you'll find pockets within a larger company where it feels like people are clicking along and they're the right people in the right seats. And my challenge with that today, I know that book was published like right around 2000, I think.
Mm.
And I mean, I would say what I've seen in the last, I'm going to say 10 years, is that people don't stay, and I'm guilty too. People don't stay in a career for very long. And I mean, I would say I've changed employers, but I kind of have been all around the same business, right? So,
Mm.
I sort of build on those strengths over the years and continue to use those strengths. But I mean, my early career, I was almost 20 years doing kind of the same or something very similar, and you don't realize over that time how much you're learning. And then,
Mm.
then you go to your point, what you've learned from Energy Drive, and then being able to utilize that experience is critical. But had you just done it for 2-3 years and moved on to something different, you wouldn't really have that to work from. And so I think
Sure.
that's a challenge today. I think people, rather than pushing, and I've said this a number of times on some of my podcasts here, that I really feel there's something to be said for pushing through the challenges with the hope of actually learning something in the long haul. But
Yeah, yeah.
everybody kind of wants they want that success right away. They
Well,
want,
they want
to,
instant gratification, right? That's
yeah.
yeah. What's his name? Uh, It'll come to me now. He says this: when the why is big enough, the how's usually not a problem. And our job is to make the
Oh,
why
is
big
that
enough. And I think,
Simon Sinek? He's the guy that's always talking about
he's
the
a big
why.
why guy. I think this was. It'll come to me now. But I think why did I stay in Energy Drive as long? It's because I had a why, I had a real why. I wanted to grow this thing, but I also wanted to grow me, and I could see I was developing it as much as Energy Drive in this process. And I think people got to find their why. If they do, they'll stay. Simon Sinek says that, of course, always start with why, right? Um, Sometimes we lose our why, I think, and then we start to think we'll find it somewhere else, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. And I think sometimes, there's a message that's put out there an awful lot, and I'm curious to see what you think of this. Is that thought that do what you love, right? Do what you love. So people are always trying to pursue some piece of their career that's going to like always bring them happiness. So I like to sail, so I want to figure out a way to make a living sailing, right? So that would be awesome if I could just spend time on a sailboat, right? But I can't make a living doing that. So I think there's this whole idea that learning to be content to some extent is almost a skill that feels like sometimes it's lost, right? We struggle to be content in the role we're
Oh,
in.
love that.
So what do you think about that? I mean,
I
do you see
love I
that
love
too?
where you're going. Yeah, you see, I think people try to find everything and everything. They try to find the fulfillment to all of their drivers in this job. So we're driven by security, variety, love and connection, personal growth, and significance. And we try and find all of that in one thing. It's like being married to one person and trying to find everything in one person as well. It's crazy. We have to look at our life and say, contentment is having bits found in all of this. And the sum of the whole is greater, and then that provides contentment in this thing. And I do think we've lost a lot of our grit to stay in, and realize that they say when you climb, if you just got helicoptered to the summit of a mountain, you'd enjoy the view, but you wouldn't enjoy it half as much as the guy that had to climb all the way up the mountain to get there.
Right.
And we have to teach people that it's in the grit and in the 11 years of sweating or the 20 years in the company that when you look back, you realize just how much you've grown, right?
Yeah. That's one of the things in that Good to Great book that I've talked a lot about lately is that he talks about the flywheel effect. And
Yeah.
I feel like even in my personal life, I've tried to really remind myself of that, even with this podcast. So, I've had to research, I've, figured out different things about lighting and cameras and editing. And I mean, there's just a lot of pieces to this, right? That are behind the scenes. I think some people know what you're involved in doing, but, you know, it's, I didn't start out knowing any of this stuff. I had to research and it's like pushing that flywheel just a little bit at a time, doing these questions, with people and trying to learn like what's the way to ask the questions, how to keep the conversation interesting or try. I'm trying to my best, but you know, I look at it as a flywheel. I look at it as like I'm just pushing it a little at a time, and eventually, I'll get the momentum and things will just continue to move, right? So
That's
that's
inspirational,
but
Dave. It really is. And exactly, but it's momentum. I think we all need momentum in our lives. We need to keep moving, right? Keep moving forward. And we need to keep having our good friend Stephen Covey, I know we both really enjoy, start with the end in mind. Keep asking, what is the end in mind here? And then there's this careful balance of it takes time to get there. There's no instant gratification. We've got to work at it and work at it and work at it. And yeah, so I guess that's the story of Energy Drive is from an idea through a hell of a lot of grit and a bit of learning and laughing at ourselves a lot.
yeah.
Putting people first, right? I think
Yeah,
that's the story.
I think that's a good point. I mean, laughing at ourselves and you know, some days I do good at that, some days not so good, but yeah. I my
Depends what's
wife and I
blowing up
talked
at the time.
yeah, my wife and I talk about that recently a lot. We said we need to try to just laugh more when things go, sideways, and just,
Mm,
stop for a second, try to find the humor in it because,
mm.
I mean, you can, we're gonna go back to Stephen Covey again. I think, you know, that book is so amazing. And I was just telling somebody that was younger and they're just starting off. I said, that's an old book, but it's a classic. And I mean, the principles and the methods are great, and that concept about the one thing you can control is how you react to things, right? And
Correct.
it's funny because we sometimes almost forget like how much control we have over that, and so like you quickly get angry or frustrated or like everything's going wrong, and it's like it's just you can choose to just laugh at stuff if you decide to. I mean, you can
You
literally just
get to
decide.
choose.
Yeah, you can just decide, I don't care how bad it gets, I'm just going to look at this and go, this is ridiculous, and start laughing because
Exactly.
you feel better when you laugh. Why not laugh? You feel better. I mean, it doesn't change the situation any more than getting angry changes it. But
Exactly.
you know?
Exactly. We never lose our power to choose. We
Yeah.
ultimately get to choose. How we're going to face the situation.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's tears. I agree. Some of the things we do is tears, but I think the key is that we take ourselves way too seriously, and sometimes we don't take ourselves seriously enough, so that we have to find the balance in that. Now I'm talking around in
Yeah.
circles.
Well,
But
yeah, one of the things about getting on the, on this podcast and getting on more social media with me is, you can't overthink it and get too caught up in. I mean, like when I set out on this journey, I said, man, I want to be as natural and real as possible. I mean, don't get me wrong. I try to clean up and put a nice shirt on, and I don't, I don't
bad
roll
haircut.
out my, yeah, I mean, I try to look a little, but I try not, I'm trying not to get too caught up in, I think if people, I really like the vulnerability thing. We could probably talk about that too, but I think that you have to be vulnerable, you have to be real, and realize that being human and showing your humanity is a far greater driver for connecting with other people than actually, having the perfect whatever, background or effects or whatever you want. So I've really enjoyed that. I've enjoyed just kind of, trying not to think too much about it and thinking about the people. And yeah, it's really been a nice journey that way with this podcast.
Mm.
So
Amazing, and you've got a great way, Dave, with people. And people buy people. People buy people. They don't buy drives. They buy people. You know,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
and if they trust you, they like you. If you manage their ego properly, and you create space, they'll listen to your crazy idea about how you're going to save them 60% of energy by putting a drive in.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And,
I've had some experiences where I've gotten to that point with customers, and it wasn't about energy savings, but I've said, just trust me. Because when I worked in a smaller company, I was the sales guy and I was also the startup guy. And so I would say to
okay.
customers, I said, I'm promising you something, and I'm the same guy that's going to be here the day it has to
Yes.
happen.
Press the
So
button.
I said, trust me, I can make this work. I've done it before, like it'll be fine. Let's look at this application, and then when you make it happen, everyone's just like, grinning ear to ear because they think, wow, this is pretty cool. We didn't think it could work
Yeah.
this way, and
Yeah.
so yeah, it's certainly been a fun journey that way, and I'm sure you've got some of the
And
same
what
stories.
and what's let me ask you a question, Dave, because it wouldn't be wrong
Yeah,
right if I didn't. So what's the why? What's the why for Dave behind, what's been your driving, why? And where's the next here?
yeah, that's a good question, and I think I struggle with that too, right? Again, like you, I feel like for me, the why I always come back to is the people aspect.
Mm.
Um, I always enjoy expanding my reach of people that I've gotten to meet and to know. Uh, Most of the time when I sit back and analyze my why, it's always comes back to wanting to contribute, wanting to be helpful. Um, I've participated in a lot of things that are sort of charity or volunteer, and those are always the most fulfilling. I think it's sort of frustrating that you can't make a living sometimes doing those things you want to do, because
Mm.
I think those are the most fulfilling pieces, right? So when I have my job and I'm going out as an account manager or salesperson, I try to carry that forward and say, okay, I'm not going to focus on what's in it for me. I'm always going to try to focus on what's in it for them. And even though, I've watched some salespeople and they walk in the room and the first thing is, here's the product, here's the features, you're going to love it, it's great, and I'm always trying to get as much as I can. I try to get understanding of what the customers are trying to do. What's the goals, what's on their mind, is there a place for me? I think that's kind of a key too. Like, is there a place for me here?
Mm.
I don't just
Mm.
assume. I never go into a customer interaction assuming that there's a place for me in their business. There
Very
may
good.
not be. I
So
mean,
good.
so yeah, you may just step away and say, hey, right now there's nothing between us business wise, but hey, let's keep the relationship going. Maybe someday, what we have with each other, we can reciprocate in some possible way in the future, right? And
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, it's always, I guess, again, it's that kind of idea that people are at the center, and I have to thank my dad and my faith for this, because I think when you have that core principle that people are the most important thing, and I think love of people is kind of at the center for me, and this kind of goes back to the Covey thing too, is that if I had one principle that I've always I haven't written it down like I probably should, but if I have one principle that I sort of default back to, is like, what's important in the relationship first. And
Yep.
it's never failed me. I mean, I've been in sales, some form of sales, my whole life, and I've always tried to focus on the relationships. And when things start to go sideways, I even try to step back and remind. I had this happen recently. Okay, the relationship with the person that's angry at me for something that's business related is more important than whatever we're dealing with. Because at the end of the
Yep.
day, we could all lose our jobs, and we're just people again, right? So,
Exactly.
so let's try to
Exactly.
just resume focus on the
Yep.
relationship,
Yep.
and see what we can do to just put all this behind us, right? So, yeah,
Beautifully
I hope
said.
that's not
Beautifully
too long
said.
winded, but thanks for asking. Yeah.
No, no, I think it's beautifully said. And I mean, there's huge synergy between the two of us. I guess what you could do is use this podcast for a sales training, because that is basically 101. How do you start a business? Put people first. How do you keep a business running? Put people first. How do you have a life that's full of contentment? Well, put others first. And
Yeah,
that's
it's
how it
tough
goes,
in
right?
sales because there's always pressure, right? There's pressure to grow the numbers. There's pressure, but what I think, and there was a book, was it Givers and Takers? There's another book that somebody recommended. It was something, I think that's the tagline, and it talked about how they kind of analyzed the data between those people who are kind of the taker, the giver, and the match. There's like a matcher, and
Mm.
at the end of the day, the data showed that the giver actually, on the long term, had greater success always than a taker or even the matcher. So the matcher is always like,
Yep.
well, yeah, I'll give you this if you give me that, right? They're always kind of like the negotiation sort of thing. And so that resonated with me because I've always kind of been that giver, and it's a slow growth curve. It never feels great at the beginning, but over time, it accelerates to a point where it almost can become unmanageable because people start trusting you, and they realize it's like that mechanic, right? We've all had that mechanic for our vehicle that we realize is
You always
100%
go to him,
trustworthy,
right?
right?
Yeah,
He's
exactly.
100% trustworthy.
Yeah.
And that guy never has time for your car because everyone's realized he's 100% trustworthy, and he's not going to try to sell you the parts you don't need or do work you don't really need. And so once that trust level builds up, so it's sort of an equity thing, right? Um, and trust is so hard to get. It's just so hard to get. So you can't, if you violate those principles of the people first, and it just sets you back, and you may be able to make a few wins, but ultimately you're going to end up on the bad side of the curve. So,
I, I mean, that's so true. It's so true. The issue of sharpen the saw. Covey's sixth habit, which is go slow to go fast. Take your time to build trust, build rapport with your clients, and you may not make a sale for the first 12 months, but the real sales managers, the guys that actually see huge success, they understand that it takes time. It takes time.
yeah.
And I, I I don't know of many clients that Energy Drive has had that wouldn't want Energy Drive to remain as a valued partner with them going forward over and over. But
Yep.
that's because we put a lot of investment in having key account managers that just spend time with people. So
Yeah.
for a
Yeah.
Drives podcast, this is exceedingly about people.
Well, when I started this journey, I really wanted to, you know, every podcast, and I know there's a lot of people that say you really need a niche podcast, something that really
Mm.
focuses in on a topic. And I hate to be just exceedingly broad, but I think and a good friend of mine has said this. He's a little older than me, and he's kind of almost come to this realization in the last few years that really people are the spice of life, like the personalities and the people you know. And some of the driving force with this, even though I'm learning how to do podcasting, I'm interviewing some people that I don't know real well, and some are my friends. Um, I mean, it's so enriching, right? There's just so much to learn from other people, and I love to be able to kind of share that. I
Mm.
mean, you're on LinkedIn. You've got a lot of
Yeah.
posts on LinkedIn. I don't see where I've seen many videos or maybe any videos that you've done. So it's nice to be able to share who Dave Betts is with my network and say, hey, here's a guy who's got some really interesting experience and has a lot to share. And, we all need that. We need to share this
Sure.
personality we have. I mean, that's the whole idea of social, right? I hate to make the air quotes, but the social media is being social. And,
Yeah.
if we were at a social event, we'd be sharing cocktails together and standing around, talking about things, right? And so this podcast is sort of a virtual extension of that kind of interaction that
Yeah.
everybody can listen in on, right? That's kind of the idea.
I love
So,
it. Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
and
challenge accepted, Dave. I need to make more videos for LinkedIn. I hear you.
yeah, it's awkward sometimes. I don't like talking to the camera by myself, and I haven't done one, but I've been thinking about it too. But sometimes it's nice just to use the camera to ask a question, say, "Hey, I'd like
Mm.
some feedback on this. What do you think?" And I want to push this out to my network, right? Um, but yeah, I love the little snippets I can do. I try to keep some of the highlights for the audience, and let them see this.
Mm.
So,
I love that. Yeah.
but
Well,
hey, I've really enjoyed our time. I told you it wouldn't take much to fill up an hour.
I think we could probably do
Part
another
two, right?
couple hours.
Part two.
Part
Yeah,
two. I think so. Yeah.
yeah,
That
uh,
sounds really good, Dave. Yeah. Well, thanks for
yeah,
having me on. It's been a delight, and I think we should do a part two and dig around some more. There's lots to find.
yeah. This was awesome. I enjoyed it too, Dave. So thanks for joining me.
No problem. Look forward to next time.